Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Greenville Rotary Club. Good afternoon. Would you all please bow your heads in prayer? As we begin this time together, may you give each of us wisdom and grace in our dealings with each other, others in our respective organizations, and those who we come in contact with today. Also, help us to see the many good things around us and ways we can be a blessing to someone we encounter today. Help our words to be positive, and in those instances where they must provide correction, clear and seasoned with humility rather than arrogant and destructive. Amen. And please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it is one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Caroline Stewart. I'm the club chaplain, and we are here today to honor the memory of our member, Bob Atkinson. Robert Irvin Atkinson was a Rotarian for 41 years. Who else in the room has been a Rotarian for 41 years? Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Bob also was a pretty impressive guy. He was a multiple Paul Harris Fellow. He served on the board of directors. He chaired Roper Mountain Holiday Lights. And I would say for all the 25 years that Roper Mountain Holiday Lights was there, Bob was a part of that, which means he probably was a part of the singing Christmas tree before that. He ran, in his later years, he ran Atkinson's Appraisals. He did home appraisals. Early in his career, he was a banker. He was a veteran. He served in Vietnam as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. And he has two children, Courtney and Price, and two grandchildren, Benjamin and Maddie. Bob wasn't just a Rotarian. He was a good Rotarian. And he was a good friend to a lot of people. Bob would be sitting at that table in the back, because Bob always sat in the table at the back. So if you feel like you didn't know Bob, he was always at a table in the back. But he was my friend. I met Bob through Holiday Lights and had a great friendship with him and got to know his family as well through Bob. So we have lost a truly valuable member of our club and one that we should all inspire to be like. So if we could have a moment of silence for Bob. Rest in peace, Bob.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's never easy following moments like that, but we appreciate you doing that. So I'm up here to introduce a guest at the meeting today, and I'll start out with Carol Rosenstiel, who I believe is attending via Zoom, guest of Linda Breeze. Thank you for coming, Carol. Next guest is Foster Knowles, guest of Greg English. Could you please stand, Foster? Thank you very much for joining us. Sherry Pinuel, guest of Pam Weaver. There you are. Thank you very much for joining us today. And Rebecca Duncan, who's a guest of the club. Rebecca, where are you? Thank you so much for joining us today. John Heers, guest of Ramona Farrell. Thank you very much, John. And Danny Norman, who I believe is also joining via Zoom, who's a guest of Ramona Farrell. So thank you very much for joining Danny. One more? Lisa who? Vermillion, and you're a guest of the club. Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming. Did we miss anybody else on the guest list? Oh, from the Reedy River Club. I hadn't gotten to visiting Rotarians yet, Amy. Jumping ahead of the agenda here, Amy. Come on. Well, thank you very much for joining today. All guests, please come back anytime. Thank you very much.
And it's my pleasure to welcome another new member to our club. So Jonathan, Hungerford, you want to come up? Sorry, catching on a drink there. Hey, how are you? Okay. So I know Jonathan, I met him through Leadership Greenville. We were in the same class. And just out of curiosity, I know we have Zoom folks too, but who else in the room is a graduate of Leadership Greenville? And then I know like Rance was in our class 45 as well. So you already have some connections there. And then Jonathan actually has ties to Rotary in a couple different ways. He was the past president of the Clemson Club back in 2014-15. Now his roots are up here in Greenville. He is a financial advisor with Millennium Wealth Advisors here in town. Has become quite well established and becoming re-involved in Rotary again. And then there's also the legacy component. So I thought this was really cool. His mother was in Rotary in Natchez, Mississippi, and was actually the first female president of that club. And sidebar, he said, out of that, only 3 Rotarians resigned because they put a female in place. Just side note. But another, right? So how many Rotarians sitting here today are legacy, where you've had family members or, right, that have been prior Rotarians? There's a few here as well, and probably also on Zoom. So again, another connection for you. Jonathan is married. We had the opportunity, I did, to personally meet his wife, Gina, at our Greenville Holiday Village VIP event. So that was really nice. And he has a family aging in ranges from 7 months to 10 years. So very busy. And we are just really grateful that you have decided to stay actively involved with Rotary, to make your home with our club, and that you embrace the 4-way test and doing good in our community. So thank you for sharing those characteristics with us. Welcome to our club.
The focus of the 2022 Rotary Peace and Conflict Resolution Conference is finding peace in a world full of conflict and bias. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's just begin with the obvious. Bias in this country is widespread when it comes to race and gender, and we're all aware of the conflicts it creates in our personal lives, in our workplaces, and in our communities. And we all know that conflict can be horrific. Some of the bias is conscious bias, where people purposefully treat other people differently based on their race or sex. Other bias is unconscious, created by living in a culture filled with bias. Each of us has a responsibility of identifying and challenging our biases. 1 in 3 people are biased against those with disabilities. When we look at those with disabilities, we often see what they cannot do, not what they can achieve. As a result, those with disabilities are significantly less employed. There are many people of color who experience disparities in healthcare, in access to healthcare and the quality of healthcare and it has been determined that one of the factors contributing to those disparities is the attitudes and behaviors of healthcare workers, attitudes of which they are often unaware. If you've ever looked at a person who is overweight and made assumptions, unconscious bias could be at play. And what about when you meet a person who speaks with a different accent? Unconscious biases are those thoughts, feelings, and assumptions that often exist outside of our conscious awareness. They have been perpetuated by the media, passed down by our parents, by peers, or by others in the community. For example, I grew up in a home where the homeless were perceived as criminals. who should be jailed or expelled from the community. Not until I started doing some research on the complex issues of homelessness did I realize that there are mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. We even had a Rotary Service Above Self scholar who was homeless for a period of time. During the peace conference, we want to change the thinking from, I don't have any biases, to which biases are mine. But importantly, we want to stop the thinking that we are bad people because we have biases. No one is immune. All of us have biases. It is part of the human condition. It is part of our breathing. And therefore, we have that saying, if you have a brain, you have a bias. Unconscious bias impacts how we treat others. It impacts our decisions. It impacts our thoughts. It impacts what we believe. And unconscious bias has a significant negative impact on our places of work because it influences hiring. It influences our promotions. It influences evaluations. It contributes to the lack of diversity in the workplace. So simply put, understanding the impact of our biases is necessary for creating inclusive communities and finding peace in our own lives. And that is what our conference is about. We want to help participants learn to identify their biases through surveys and discussion and self-reflection. We want participants to understand causes of bias. We want people to be equipped with skills to challenge their biases and the biases of others. And Rotarians, we need help with this conference. We need sponsors. If you know of a sponsor, please let us know. All of us can be champions of peace sponsors. We need committee members, people to help with everything from serving as an aide to a speaker to designing an ad for the community journal. We need registrations. The fee for the conference is only $45. So please let your organizations and networks know about the conference. I have save the date cards, which I wish you would pass out to those that you know. One of the things that we want to help people know about is that human resources professionals can earn 5.25 recertification hours of credit by participation in the conference. In the future, one of these club meetings will be canceled, and as a result, 40 people in this club will be able to register for the conference free. Watch for an email from Michelle about the discount code that you will need to register for the conference. And please tell everyone about the conference. So go to our website, peaceandconflictresolution.com, to register, to sponsor, and to learn more about bias. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Just under 60 years ago, the foundation of our nation was rattled by the 500,000 feet that made their way to the steps of Abraham Lincoln's memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. A young Baptist minister from Atlanta was the last speaker of the weekend's events. His poetic prose was a great beacon light of hope to millions of minorities in this country. And as he spoke, his legacy became etched into America's anthem with every stanza. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Christian, American, activist, husband, father, Negro. Jeremiah Dew, or JDew of Greenville, is an entrepreneur and performer. Today, he is joining us as an echo of that triumphant day. His stage experience, One Voice, a Black history narrative, includes several iconic African-American characters that help paint the picture of where we have been as a country and where we currently are. When not on stage, You can find JDew at one point entertaining on the court as Clemson University's hype man for men's and women's basketball, the former MC for the Greenville Drive minor league baseball team, or working on his business from home. Fellow Rotarians, JDew.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro is languished to the corners of American society and finds himself an exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cash this check, a check which will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. And for those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content, will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of this nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline, We must never allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy, which has engulfed the Negro community, must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We cannot be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. I'm not unmindful that many of you have come here today out of great trials and tribulations. Many of you have come fresh from narrow jails. Many of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, and so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day, on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will one day be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain will be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the South. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America's to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing together in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you. Please be seated. Please be seated. Thank you so much, Greenville Rotary, for having me back. It's been a couple years now. I thought I did a great job last time, but it's been 3, 4, 5 years and I didn't come back. So, thank you so much for your attention today and the time that you've blessed me to be able to speak with you again. We are going to take some time to learn about the words that I said or review them. Many of you have heard them once or twice before. How many of you have heard me do the dream speech before? I know there's a few. Of course, Dr. Prince. She doesn't miss any of them. So wherever I am, she can find me. So great to see you guys again, those of you who have seen me in action before. So my name is JDew. How many of you have seen me at Clemson? We got any Tiger fans in the building? All right. Greenville Drive baseball over the years. Very good. So this is the other set of clothes that I have. Like a superhero, right? You've seen me in my jerseys, right? With my name on the back or, throwing I apologize. I didn't bring any t-shirts. I don't have anything to give away today. But I've been doing this speech, what was called remarks. All they were called was remarks in 1963 at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, August of 1963. I've been doing this as part of my full show experience, One Voice, a Black History Narrative, for 11 years now. And what it is then till now, Black American history through several character voices. So I play the voices. And we'll see and hear Frederick Douglass, MLK, Muhammad Ali, Barack Obama, and James Weldon Johnson. Some of you know his work more than you know his name. He did God's Trombones. Some of you are familiar with that from church or poetry that we had to do in middle school. And secondarily, he wrote the lyrics to the Negro National Anthem, the Black National Anthem, as well. His brother wrote the music. So they did that as a family together. So you'll see and hear those characters. So JDew makes no appearances. Hopefully I did okay as MLK. So you don't hear any commentary from me. It's not about what I might think or I'm trying to convince anything for you to think. We just need to think a little bit more about the words in the context of which they came. So we'll hear and see Frederick Douglass's first chapter of his first autobiography. So he wrote 3. So we got some work to do, all of you guys. Okay. So 3 autobiographies. So the first chapter of the first autobiography, obviously MLK's dream speech and several other pieces. So we are not talking about those pieces. We are with them talking through those pieces in their context, in their time, and those men doing what they did in the light of the communities and the culture with which they work, which is very much part of what I see in the vision, not exactly the mission, but the vision of what Rotarians do as well. What type of influence and positive impact are we going to give our community? And these men were just doing what they thought they needed to do in that context. Does that make sense? So we can think about those things while listening to them speak. So I do my best to kind of sound and dress up like them and things like that throughout the show. But so for 11 years or so, I've been able to do that show in groups like this, civic groups, mostly schools and churches and corporate events as well. And that show experience has voices. And the other part of it are the vignettes, what I call the vignettes. And I believe the last time I came through, I played one of those vignettes. And those are mostly elderly African-American people who are local to the community in which I might be speaking. And I've been able to find a few of those, and now I'm ramping up business to find more of those voices where they sit down and tell us their story that happened in their context, whether it was something that happened during the civil rights movement proper, or Jim Crow era lifestyle situations they had to go through. Very, very powerful pieces as well. And the one that I didn't bring today, because I do have a bit of a commercial for you guys to see the entire show. The one that I didn't bring that I believe I brought last time was the very first man who helped inspire what is now One Voice. It didn't start by anything that I had talent or potential skill for at all. It was listening to a man who was giving his testimony for Leadership Greenville Project. And there were several Black folks from this community who lent their voices in a home type interview video portion. And they told stories about what happened to them. Now, this man, Wilfred J. Walker Sr., some of you might even know that name if I give you enough context. He lived right in front of Serene Stadium. Now that section of University Ridge is named in his honor and memory. But he gave me and some other folks, I was voluntold to be a part of someone else's Leadership Greenville project. I showed up with the camera and I'm not a graduate of Leadership Greenville. Now I just finished Furman's DLI. Anybody done the diversity? Okay, I just finished that one. So I finally have some letters after my name after all this time. But I've never actually been in Leadership Greenville, but Mr. Walker was a teacher at Greenville's all-Black high school, Sterling High School. He told us a story at 95 years old when I met him about something he had experienced, very, very emotional to him, and how he was treated in this building in 1935. And it took me, it changed my life, completely changed my life. I was 24 years old at the time, wasn't even trying to be in the context of his home. And he told that story and I said, that's not how I heard or thought about it from the books at school. And I said, what if we could get people to see and hear it as real people? And that's where the genesis of what now is One Voice. I said, what if Martin Luther King came and spoke to Rotary? We didn't talk or think about him, but what if he came and spoke? So that's where these contexts came in. So that's started my journey being able to talk and memorize and do all those things just like those characters so we could see them in their own context. And then we could hear those people tell their stories as well. So if you are so inclined, or if you've got your phone out, February 13th, it's Super Bowl Sunday. We just figured that out. But First Presbyterian wasn't paying attention to that when they booked me. 6 p.m. Sunday evening, February 13th at First Presbyterian in their main sanctuary. I'll be there with the entire 90-minute or so, well, most all the pieces for the One Voice program. So would love to have you join there. It's a free event, community event put on by that church. So we are going to, I think I've got plenty of time, I guess, but we've got one more thing to watch. And we're going to take things into context for more current events. And I'll introduce it in just 1 second. But before we get to that, and we'll have time, I think, again, after, I suppose, this about 4.5-minute clip. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts on what you've seen or heard so far? Happy to entertain them. I know some of you are a little bit lost on me because normally I'm screaming and yelling and throwing stuff at this point, introducing half times and all that. So I know you're learning me for the first time, except now, Mr. Wiggensheimer, he's known me for a long, long time. His son and I went to high school together. So he's known all sorts of faces on JDew, but some of you are seeing this for the first time, I understand. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Well, as I was telling the ladies at my table here, some of the plans for the future is the question here is, well, as you can see, I'm starting to wear out here. I'm 38 in like 2 weeks. So I've been doing this for a little while at this point, and I'm getting tired. So we've got 3.5 kids. Number 4 is on his way in May. And those of you who have children, you understand that Yeah, it's a big fun event until you have them, and then you just need a nap. Yeah, you're wondering why you're so upset and tired and broke all at the same time. Like, I don't understand what happened. So we've got 3.5 kids, entrepreneur. So I have several entrepreneurial ventures. One of the big things that I'm doing in the context of this program is over the course of this year, I mentioned the vignettes. The vignettes are the people who tell the stories. And they tell that, so it gives me time to run backstage, change clothes, and become the next character. But we'll listen to Mr. Walker or someone else. Dr. Marguerite C. Wright Crosby, some of you know that name. Professor Emerita at Clemson University, and she was part of the Greenville 8, the 8 students that were down at Springfield Baptist who marched their way to the library, and they got arrested in 1960. Jesse Jackson's very first time of being arrested. Well, those people, I have over the course of my part-time efforts in 11 years, recorded 6 of those vignettes. Well, what I started to realize in the last couple of years is those people are aging out of being able to share their stories with us. So my new efforts are twofold. One is to create curriculum around what I'm doing so it can scale and be able to be in the classroom and the conference room a little bit quicker and more spread out through the community. And the second thing is to find those voices, what I call vignettes, faster, so we can go get them before they're not able to share their stories. So that's a big effort over the course of 2022, some new business partners, organizing as a nonprofit, things like that, I think that I'll be doing. Other than that, I've got a lot of kids at the house. Yeah, a lot of kids at the house. Tell you what. Yes, ma'am. Good question. You're right. So several of the characters that I do are, recorded in 20th century history. So I can do my best. So if you go to watch Dr. King do his dream speech from the Lincoln Memorial, and there's 1 million views, half of them are me, because I was trying to get it in my head, right? So there are some ways to cheat on those 20th century characters, Barack Obama, of course, and things like that, right? Muhammad Ali, those characters. Now, Frederick Douglass, I'll say, sounds a lot like JDew, is just what I'll say. Sounds a lot like JDew when you see that one. So we'll see you at First Presbyterian. But so I don't do too much for that. But Malcolm X is a character, a voice that I only do in virtual programs now. But I've gone to the studio and been able to upgrade that over the course of COVID. There's been the technology as well as the rest of us kind of caught up to being able to do virtual type programs. Booker T. Washington, Malcolm X, John Lewis, all those folks. And my hair matches each character, okay? So there's lots of time in between some of those studio sessions so I could match those characters. But the ones where we do know how they sounded, I think it's okay. I sound like them, yes. Very good question. Other questions, thoughts? Yes. I have, yes, actually. So many of us in this community know Nika White. So fortunately, been able to do this show. I'll be in Chicago again doing a little bit of a tour at right before COVID hit, January, MLK Day, February, Black History Month. So right before COVID hit, like 5 minutes before, in 2020, I was in California. I did several shows. My mother lived in Sacramento and things like that. So I'm sorry, your question was, yeah, the characters. So yes, for instance, Nika White in this community. So we know her, many of us do. She was doing her conference and convention in the fall. She's got a big to do, and several of you have probably been recipients of that. Yes, there she is on the cover of Greenville magazine right now. Right, she's just all over. So John Lewis passed, and so she said, "JDew, we need John Lewis." And of course, she knows. She's like, she knew I could do it. Can you get me John Lewis? So it took about a month. Went to the studio, shaved my head, and all that stuff, and I did John Lewis. Yeah. So of course, he has some amazing pieces because I'm really looking for. I'm not trying to manipulate stories into. Normally, I'm not trying to manipulate stories into the context of what we want them to be. I'm saying their words. So if that has a draw into what's going on currently or in the culture, it's wonderful. But of course, John Lewis had some great speeches. So good question. I was kind of foreshadowing that into what we're about to watch. So think about that for a second. Yes, sir. Good question, actually. So recently, not that particular story. That was new to me as I just heard it from you. There have been 1 or 2 other stories. I think what I've learned when Mr. Walker, a man who lived in my own community, I worked at the ballpark at that time full time. So he lived 2 minutes away, went to Allen Temple Church and shopped at the same Bilo as me downtown, that type of thing. I realized that we all could do a better job at trying to make sure we understood the stories of our neighbors. And what I realized at the beginning of 2020, so remember that in 2020 that we went to this episodic adventure. It was terrible for most everybody. But first, Kobe Bryant dies, and then we've got COVID, and then we've got murder hornets, and then we got tornadoes in Greenville. You see what I'm saying? There was a lot of episodes. Remember the episode where the government, the all omniscient government out there told us that we needed to check on our neighbors. Do you remember that part of our episodic adventure? We were all stuck at home, but you need to go check on your neighbors. There's a lot of people who may not be doing well at their house. And what I realized is that neighborliness is what we were missing, because if we're able to understand the stories of our neighbors, we're going to have different conversations in our community. That's what's most important. And there's so many things that we're willing and ready to argue over or confront without knowing the stories of the people that are around us. And if we did pay attention to them better, or if we just knew them, or were able to be presented them in a compelling or dramatic way, even potentially, that we would have better communities because of that. Good question. So Dr. Crosby, for instance, that I mentioned, the Greenville 8 story, she is the only, I don't do any women, and as I don't embody any women in my story, but I have a woman in my show, and she tells her own story. So I'm looking to find more of those for sure. Several years ago as well, the hospital system, as they changed from hospital to health, now their Prisma, of course, had me do a documentary on the integration of the hospital. It's a 45-minute feature. You might find it somewhere. But there was lots of women who told their stories in this community as well. So I don't embody the women characters, but there's a lot of great ones out there. Shirley Chisholm, she gets a lot of love around January because she's celebrating an anniversary for, some of her elections and things like that. But I'm not going to do those at this time. So Rosa Parks, Oprah, Shirley Chisholm, I'll send you the script and we'll do a 2-person show. Me and you will be able to do it. Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that question. So you remember in the 1930s and 40s, the Federal Writers Project, and there were people who were aging out of being formerly enslaved people, and the government commissioned a lot of out-of-work writers during the Depression to go find them. So that is the new mission, I think, that I'm on, but it is a pretty new and infant mission. So I would love to hear from you as a phone call or an email. Hey, there's somebody that I think you might want to know right now. So far, everybody that has been in my show on my part-time basis of going through this without partnership, which is just forming, have a tie to South Carolina. Not all of them are South Carolinian stories, but they have a tie to South Carolina as well. But I'm looking to do so much more. And I think it really could be an amazing thing for many communities, many communities. So if I go to Montgomery, Alabama to do my show, the vignettes within the story, we'll still see and hear MLK and Frederick Douglass, but the vignettes will be local folks from that community in between to tell their story about X school, X library visit, X, commercial event or whatever, something like that. So I would love to know them if you do. Also, I didn't grow up in Greenville, so this is home now for sure, but I didn't grow up here, so I was not aware of the cultural gaps as much until Mr. Walker told the community members his story, and I happened to be there, and I said, this is just, I thought this stuff was ancient history, and things like that. So good question. Thank you. All right, we better get to it, shall we? So ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do now is, once again, I'm going to take the words of yesteryear, and I'm going to quote them from someone who was quoting yesteryear again. We're going to go back 2 generations. You're going to hear the quotes inside the quotes, and we're going to think about what that means in a current cultural context. Now, the current cultural context at the time, this is the summer of 2020, and it's the George Floyd and Derek Chauvin type protesting, but we're taking it local. So you're going to see me on Main Street talking about something that's contextually relevant, but I'm not using any current words. Then they'll come up, I think, and we'll finish. Thank you.
When we have our march, You need to be there for me.
One day a man came to Jesus, and he wanted to raise some questions about some vital matters of life. At points, he wanted to trick Jesus and show him that he knew a little more than Jesus knew and throw him off base. Now that question could have easily ended up in a philosophical and theological debate. But Jesus immediately pulled that question from midair and placed it on a dangerous curve between Jerusalem and Jericho. And he talked about a certain man who fell among thieves. Now you remember that a priest and a Levite passed by on the other side. They didn't stop to help him. But then a man of another race came by. He got down from his beast, decided not to be compassionate by proxy, but he got down with them, administered first aid, and helped the man in need. Jesus ended up saying this was the good man. This was the great man, because he had the capacity to project the I into the thou and to be concerned about his brother. Now, you know, we use our imagination a great deal in trying to determine why the priest and the Levite didn't stop.
The times we say they were busy going to a church meeting, an ecclesiastical gathering, and they had to get on down to Jerusalem so they wouldn't be late for their meeting. At other times, we would speculate that there was a religious law that one who was engaged in religious ceremonial was not to touch a human body 24 hours before the ceremony. And every now and then we begin to wonder whether maybe they were not going down to Jerusalem, down to Jericho rather, to organize a Jericho Road Improvement Association. That's a possibility. Maybe they felt that it was better to deal with the problem from the causal root rather than to get bogged down with an individual effect.
But
I'm going to tell you what my imagination tells me.
You know, it's possible that those men were afraid. You see, the Jericho Road is a dangerous road. In the days of Jesus, it came to be known as the Bloody Pass. And it's possible that the Levite and the priest looked over that man on the ground and they wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible that they felt that the man on the ground was merely faking and that he was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize them over there, to lure them there for a quick and easy seizure. And so the first question that the priest asked, the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? That's the question before you. Not if I stop to help, what will happen to my job? Not if I stop to help, what will happen to all of the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week? The question is not if I stop to help the man in need, what will happen to me? The question is, if I do not stop to help, what will happen to them?
Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. And I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you.
But then the Good Samaritan came by and he asked a different question. I think it's a beautiful reminder to us while we get into the heated debates with our grandmother and our cousin and our neighbor on Facebook, right? We know you all done it. To make sure that we're asking ourselves the right questions. There's a lot of new things that are going to come up in our day and our world all the time. New culture, conflicts that we saw here. Dr. Prince mentioned that so well. A lot of things are always going to come up, but I don't think we always have to ask ourselves new questions. We can ask ourselves old questions and apply them in new contexts. We've got Dr. King 50 plus years ago reminding us of words like this, quoting the great prophet of Nazareth 2,000 years ago, the same words. We're using the same words for new contexts and social situations all the time. And if we do that in conversation with our neighbors a lot better, I think that we can make a lot more progress. Thank you so much for what you all do as Rotarians here. Thank you for having me back. Again, hope maybe it'll be another 4 or 5 years. So maybe I'll have something new for you next time as well. But thank you so much for letting me be here with you guys this afternoon.
So JDew, thank you very, very much for sharing your voice to create one voice. Appreciate that. On JDew's behalf, we again donate books to Alexander Elementary School to increase their library. This book will be How You Ever Wondered What You Will Be, or Have You Ever Wondered What You Will Be? So thank you. So I appreciate it in your words, right? Understanding the stories of our neighbors takes time. It takes a desire to want to understand and hear those stories. So I think you challenge us, right, to do that. And then also, I think the seeing and hearing. So as you were speaking and emulating Martin Luther King, I don't know, did you feel drawn in? I felt myself like you get the tingles, right? Or starting to feel like you've been transported to that time. And I like for our schools, how important that is, right? To give that. So thank you, right, for making that difference. And One Voice, February 13th, First Presbyterian. So seek out that information. We have our cart on the table, right? Research for Alzheimer's. This week's champion is Lisa Minnick. So please give generously, because then she will too. If you want to be a cart champion, please add a business card or rip off a piece of paper off the table and submit your name in there, and we'll add you to our growing list. It's been very good. And then also at this time for our month end, it's time to have a drawing to give. This time it'll be a $25 gift card to Barnes & Noble for those who have been bringing guests to our meeting. So with that, I think, okay, can't be me. But I was just at lunch with Rance last week. And what did you say to me, Rance, about the drawing? Oh my God, number 4. And just for the record, like there are several other names in the bucket, you guys. But Rance, honestly, you must like have a magnet or something. So thank you, right, for those who are bringing guests to our meeting. And for our guests, love to have you join our club. So attend a Discover Rotary meeting. There's some information on the table. You can also reach out to Michelle, our executive director, or to the individual who invited you to be a guest to ask, so what do I do to become a member? What are my next steps? Love to grow our membership and continue to do good in our community and in our world. With that, if we'll stand and do the 4-way test, please. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you for attending today. And thanks on Zoom.